Hello and welcome to Indus News with me, Usman Lone. Well, we begin this hour with our top story, and that's with Pakistan and Kashmir, as foreign diplomats who visited areas along the line of control in Azad Kashmir have rejected India's claims of destroying so-called terror camps. They acknowledge that India has targeted civilians in its ceasefire violations. More in this report. Foreign diplomats and the international press visited areas along the LOC hit by Indian firing over the weekend. They visited shops in different areas and met locals.
Along with my colleagues, I witnessed, saw that these damages, sufferings, injuries by the local people here. I'm thinking is that people are suffering, and that is why this Kashmir dispute is more and more, I should say, important for the international community.
The visit has exposed the Indian Army chief's lies.
There is no evidence of any terrorist camp in this area. They are all ordinary people, ordinary civilians trying to make their living.
The visit also exposed India's desperate attempts to divert attention from a humanitarian crisis in occupied Kashmir. Indian High Commission officials in Islamabad were also invited, but they didn't show up.
I have special feeling when I see that civilians were targeted here, and unfortunately with some casualties. And I could see that the people are they are patriots. They have special feeling, and they hosted us on the best way to show, to be open and to tell what happened really.
South Africa's acting High Commissioner Christo Jansi-Van lamented that Indian forces are violating the principles of humanity. Pakistan's military spokesperson Major General Asif Ghafoor said the Indian High Commission could not stand behind its own army chief's claims. While staying with Kashmir, the United States has again expressed concern over the crisis in occupied Kashmir due to India's human rights violations. Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia, Alice G. Wells, said Washington is closely monitoring the situation. In her statement to the U.S. Foreign Affairs Committee, Wells rejected India's claims that the situation in the valley is normal. She said the U.S. urges India to respect human rights and restore communications. New Delhi's lockdown and communications blackout in occupied Kashmir has now entered its 79th day. India's business community threatens to boycott Malaysian palm oil as Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad made a speech criticizing India's actions in occupied Kashmir. Malaysia ignored the boycott threats and doubled down on its stance opposing New Delhi's actions. Speaking in Kuala Lumpur, Prime Minister Mahathir said Malaysia does not retract from its principal positions and said Malaysia asked member states to abide by UN resolutions. Malaysia exported over $1.5 billion worth of palm oil and products to India last year. Mahathir said Malaysia will evaluate the situation in the coming days. Now, over 300,000 employees of Indian state-run banks went on strike against the government plans to consolidate the sector through mergers. Bank employees stayed away from work across the country and joined in protest marches. More in this report.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government has vowed to cut the total number of state-owned banks to 12 from 27, raising fears of job losses. Under the current round of squeezing, 10 banks will be amalgamated into 4. Bank employees say the merger is meant to harm the poor and only benefits the corporate industry.
This merger, it will benefit the corporates because they will write off huge loans now by pooling the resources of all the banks. This is the dangerous situation. This government is for corporates, and this action is also for corporates.
They also demanded that interest rate cuts on deposits be stopped, the recovery of bad loans and action against defaulters.
We are not only opposing the proposal of mergers, we are also demanding for the recovery of bad loans to a tune of 10 lakh crores accumulated throughout the country, defaulted by big corporate houses.
The employees say they will continue to protest until the government assures them that their jobs are secure.
Now, in Pakistan's capital, Islamabad, the Centre for Aerospace and Security Studies organized a national conference on Pakistan's quest for regional security and stability. The event was attended by senior military officials, academics and diplomats. Our correspondent Samira Khan has this report.
Pakistan's top military, diplomatic and academic strategists gathered in Islamabad evaluate the factors defining the security and stability of the region. Center for Aerospace and Security Studies President, retired Air Marshal Kaleem Saadat, gave an overview of the internal and external challenges facing Pakistan.
End of globalization, the rise of populism, the rise of Indian Hinduata, all these factors have added to Pakistan's security problems.
The chairman of the Pakistan Military's Joint Chiefs of Staff Committee, General Zubair Hayat, said India's illegal annexation of occupied Kashmir in August has had a devastating effect on South Asia's stability. CAS Director Air Marshal Javed Ahmed pointed to India's adventurism into Azad Kashmir.
I am of the firm view that we should use all elements of national power, and this includes your diplomatic prowess as well as your military, and we should not disregard any option.
CAS Deputy Director Air Commodore Adil Sultan explained how India is trying to exploit the no first use of nuclear arsenal as a threat to regional states.
Probably India could revise no first use. So Pakistan has to take those statements very seriously into consideration and develop appropriate response options.
Later, the former governor of the State Bank of Pakistan, Dr. Ishrat Hussain, highlighted the economic and political interface of the security and stability equation in South Asia. Reporting for Indus News, Sumaira Khan, Islamabad.
Now, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan meets Russia's President Vladimir Putin at the Black Sea resort of Sochi today. The meeting comes before a ceasefire agreement in northern Syria is set to expire. Earlier, President Erdogan threatened to resume its military operation if the United States fails to ensure Kurdish forces are removed from the area. Erdogan said Turkey will continue the offensive with greater determination if Washington fails to keep their end of the bargain. The president said he will brief President Putin on how a Syrian constitutional committee can make progress over the conflict. Well, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has denounced Turkey's offensive in the northeast of his country. He also pledged to retake all areas lost in the 8 years of civil war. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad made a rare visit to a front line of Syria's conflict in northwestern Idlib province. The area is close to the last major bastion of rebel forces. Assad was surrounded by army commanders in the town of Hobayt. The Syrian military took control of Hobayt in August after a Russian-led offensive to capture Idlib and its surroundings. Turkey began an assault against the Kurdish militia in Syria's northeast earlier this month. Now, as protests continue in Lebanon, the cabinet has approved a package of reforms to calm protests calling for the government's removal. Speaking after a cabinet meeting, Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri said no new taxes will be imposed in next year's budget. However, protesters have rejected the reforms, saying they don't trust any plan by the current government. More in this report.
Massive protests have rocked all major Lebanese cities over allegations of fiscal indiscipline and corruption. The demonstrations are the biggest in Lebanon since 2005. With tens of thousands of people on the streets across the country, the government rushed to implement the long-delayed reforms. The cabinet approved many austerity measures, including the slashing of lawmakers' salaries by 50%.
A 50% reduction in salaries of current and ex-lawmakers and ministers. 4. a reduction in the budget of the Development and Reconstruction Committee, the Fund for the Displaced, and the Committee of the South by 70%.
Prime Minister Hariri also announced that the government will privatize power production plants within 4 months. Hariri said he supports the protesters' demand for early elections.
You have to know your voice is being heard, and if early election is something that you want in order to make sure that your voice is being heard, then I, Saad Hariri, will personally support you in this.
Hailing the protesters, Hariri said the demonstrations have put the Lebanese national identity back in its place.
US Defense Secretary Mark Esper met with Saudi King Salman bin Abdul Aziz in Riyadh to discuss strategic cooperation. Bilateral relations and developments in the region were discussed during the meeting. Earlier this month, the Pentagon said it was deploying more US troops to Saudi Arabia. The request was made from the kingdom following an attack on its oil plants. The total number of troops deployed to Saudi Arabia since the attack has reached 3,000. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he will push for an election if Parliament delays his Brexit bill. Brexit is hanging in the balance as a divided Parliament debates when, how or even whether the UK should leave the EU. The British Prime Minister is facing a major showdown in Parliament over his promise to lead the country out of the EU by the end of this month. Boris Johnson has urged MPs to back his Brexit deal. The Prime Minister said the chances of a no-deal exit will increase if Parliament rejects Johnson's motion on the timetable of Brexit legislation. Speaking in Parliament, Johnson said the EU does not want to delay. Opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn said his party will not support Johnson's Brexit deal or timetable. A European Commission team will start work on post-Brexit ties on the 16th of November. The Commission said the task force will begin its work regardless of developments in the UK. Well, we'll be back with more news from around the world right after this short break. Hello and welcome back to Indus News. Now, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is set to retain power for a second term. But preliminary results show that Trudeau's Liberal Party fell short of securing enough seats to form a majority government. Trudeau said the people have voted for a progressive agenda, but the Liberals will now need to work with other parties to get legislation through Parliament. US President Donald Trump tweeted congratulations to Trudeau on a wonderful and hard-fought victory. In Switzerland, the right-wing Swiss People's Party has won the federal elections. The anti-immigrant party received 25% of the vote. The SVP is the largest party in the 246-member parliament. The Social Democratic Party got 16% of the votes and the Green Party received 13% of votes. Switzerland has over 5 million eligible voters, but only 45% of them cast their vote in Sunday's elections. Greece has moved hundreds of asylum seekers to the mainland from an island on its coast. The decision was made to cope with the problem of crowded migrant camps. Officials say about 700 migrants and refugees arrived at Elefsina port near Athens from Samos Island. The Samos migrant camp was built for 650 people but houses more than 5,700. The migrant arrest of drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's son. More in this report.
As government authorities and Culiacan residents struggle to make sense of how their city was easily infiltrated by armed criminals last week, others have busied themselves in repairing the damage.
I think that local businesses are only today reviewing what the damage is to their stores, and I think it's going to take a few days for businesses to re-establish themselves again.
Those who saw the violence complained that local police and the Mexican armed forces were easily overwhelmed by fighting from the cartels. Some even suspect that the authorities may be colluding with the criminals they are supposed to be fighting.
It's infuriating because you have to ask yourself, who's really in charge? If these soldiers, these people, the state, municipal and transit police are colluding with them, what are we going to do? Who can we tell what's happening to us if the authorities are in on it?
The Sinaloan cartel was also successfully able to pressure the Mexican authorities into releasing Joaquin Guzman's son. 62-year-old El Chapo was sentenced to life in prison in the US last July. Since then, his sons have tried to fill his shoes, but those familiar with the drug trade in Mexico call them fleshy party boys who don't have what it takes to run a ruthless drug empire.
In Brazil, thousands of volunteers have taken part to remove thick oil sludge from 200 northeastern beaches. Calling it a treat to wildlife, the environmental agency IBAMA said at least 15 sea turtles, 2 seabirds and a fish have been killed due to the oil spill. It said the oil sludge has been mysteriously washing up along 1,300 miles of coastline since September. IBAMA President Eduardo Bim said the tests had proved the crude oil was produced in Venezuela. The officials had not been able to identify the vessel responsible for the leak yet. However, Venezuela has denied responsibility for the oil spill. Well, staying with Brazil with the intention of breaking the Guinness World Book of Records, a team of graffiti artists in Sao Paulo has painted a 10,000 square meter big mural. The colorful work of Urban Aquarium covers 15 tall buildings right in the center of the city. More in this report.
What is a better way to brighten your day than to see fantastic squids, jellyfish on the side of a city scraper? This massive graffiti-style urban aquarium is adding fun and colors to the dull days of passers-by in Sao Paulo. A giant octopus submerged in bright colors alone covers one of the 15 interconnected dyed buildings. Brazilian graffiti artist Felipe Young and his team intend to turn the urban aquarium into the world's biggest piece of urban art.
It is a painting of more than 10,000 square meters on interconnected buildings forming complex work, which is immersive. It's a privileged location in the center of Sao Paulo.
Flip said his words aim to raise awareness on environmental and urban issues.
The size of the project brings with it the importance of preserving bodies of water. Aside from bringing color and life to the center of Sao Paulo, which is made of concrete, steel, and ash that is tiring in people's day-to-day lives.
The amazing art has been created in partnership with the city's cultural council.
In Malta, the people of Gozo Island have celebrated the International Kite Festival in the village of Garb. The streets have been covered by 2,000 colourful kites, making the village look more festive under their blue skies. More in this report.
Hundreds of brightly colored kites fluttered in the breeze as Malta held the second International Kite Festival. Kites depicting popular cartoon characters filled the clear blue sky for a 3-day festival since October 18. The event featured competitions for international teams of kite masters, workshops for the best handmade kites, and art with deep roots in Gozo were also arranged. Festival organizers said kites have a fascinating history across global cultures. In Malta, kites have been used to send messages during wars in the past. They have also been used as royal sports or to measure distances. The festival was organized by Garb Local Council.
Julian's Auctions will hold its Icons and Idols, a rock and roll auction in New York on Friday. Items belonging to legendary musicians Kurt Cobain, Michael Jackson and Elvis Presley will all hit the auction block.
A sweater worn by Kurt Cobain during Nirvana's appearance on MTV Unplugged in 1993 is expected to fetch up to $300,000. A leather glove of Michael Jackson wore during the Jackson's Triumph Tour in 1981 is expected to go for up to $200,000.
This auction, we have over 700 lots, and some of the top pieces are, we have Kurt Cobain's guitar that he played on the In Utero tour in 1993. We estimate it $300,000 to $500,000. What's great about the guitar is it comes with a letter from Courtney Love saying that it was Kurt's favorite guitar.
A mustard yellow velvet jacket worn by Elvis Presley in the film Go Happy will also be auctioned. Even 25 years after Cobain's death, his band Nirvana still has a strong following.
Even though Kurt Cobain died, 27 years old, over 25 years ago, I mean, there's still a fascination with him and his music, and he's constantly getting a new fan base. His Nirvana music, it's played all over the world, and there's become a surge in his collectability of his items.
The auction begins Friday morning at the Hard Rock Cafe in Manhattan. Bidders can also participate online.
Well, we'll be back with news from the world of business and sports right after this short break. Welcome back. Now in business news, Wall Street opens higher after a batch of upbeat earnings reports eased concerns about domestic growth. A surge in Biogen boosted the healthcare sector, pushing the stocks higher. The Dow Jones Industrial Average traded 10 points higher. The S&P 500 and Nasdaq Composite also gained points at the opening bell. European stock markets are in negative territory because of continuing uncertainty about Brexit, but most Asian stock markets have closed higher on rising optimism of a trade deal between the United States and China. Paris's CAC index is nearly 0.5% lower as investors track third quarter corporate earnings. London's FTSE 100 and the DAX in Frankfurt are marginally higher. In Asia, the Shanghai Composite gained 0.5% after US and Chinese officials said trade talks were on track. Tokyo's Nikkei 225 index picked up 0.25%, while the Hang Seng index in Hong Kong was up a fraction. The Kospi index in Seoul rose more than 1% on the back of gains by tech stocks. Well, it's 24 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but we'll be back at the top of the hour with the headlines. Thank you for watching and bye-bye.